Afternoon Talk on SAFM.
I like this. Certainly somebody listening and talking about the social worker, saying amazing, a social worker without a job, unless there's an attitude in this country, I don't know, but please let her contact me. So that's fantastic. That's what we want, really. If you are in a position to assist anybody who's doing the on-air job pitch, we'd be just thrilled if you actually can give them a job. So do that. Drop me an email, in fact, to ashraf@safm.co.za. And I also remind you, tomorrow being Friday, always on a Friday morning, rather Friday 2 o'clock, the 2 o'clock discussion is all about you. In fact, it's what we call the people's voice. It's a big question that's driven by you. Now, if you want us to raise a topic that we're not doing at the moment, it doesn't have to concern you. It's just something that concerns you. So it doesn't have to concern, it's not about you. It could just concern you because you're irritated about it or whatever it is. Drop me an email and I'll certainly take it from there. And also, 2:30 on a Tuesday or on a Friday, we also talk consumer issues. So we sort of try and right consumer wrongs. And if you feel strongly about something, whatever it is, in fact, we will talk about that Sandton City building collapse and what that means for a consumer when you're walking as a shopper. What does that really mean for you? So with that in mind, let's move on to In the Spotlight. Every day we speak to someone and put them in the spotlight and get into their mind and learn something, and I think we all do, as we know, right? Well, Rene Kenosi is one such person. She is now the chairman of the Independent Regulatory Board for Auditors. So Rene, good chatting to you. I should say Mr. Chairman, but you didn't say not Mr. I'm just the chairman. Hi.
Good afternoon, Ashraf, and good afternoon to your listeners.
Thank you. Let's talk about what is it that you do. This, the Independent Regulatory Board for Auditors. I know about the Auditor General. How do you differ from that?
Well, Ashraf, we regulate the auditors. We ensure that our public confidence is increased or rather maintained, so that when you see a set of financial statements, you know that you can actually place reliance on what you see before you. So I think what's very difficult is that we see a lot of overregulation in various professions, and I think the one thing that the IRBA has tried to do is to have the balance between neither over or under regulation, and it's both about assisting the auditors where they require it, but more so to give confidence to the public and more investors as well.
And generally, in doing what you do you in fact represent the auditors, or do you represent the public?
Our main responsibility is to the public.
Okay, but effectively in terms of governance, the people on that board, in terms of the body, are auditors, right?
Well, this is the first time in the history of the IRBA that we have an independent board. None of the board members on the board, as of 2015, are registered auditors. We're all independent. I think of the 8 members, 6 of us are chartered accountants. We have a professor, we have an advocate, and we also have a certified internal auditor. So general governance around, but all chartered mostly chartered accountants,
but not auditors.
None of us are registered auditors for the first time in the history of IRBA.
What's the rationale behind that?
Well, the World Bank had done a review, and one of the areas they highlighted was that the board needed to be independent, purely because we protecting the public interest. So rather than having the conflict of interest with having registered auditors on the board, it was important that the minister in the appointment of the new board had considered that as well. And in addition to that, we also have some of the international bodies that had started actually saying that they were not willing to share information with us purely because of the conflict of interest that we had registered auditors.
So there were examples of those conflicts in the past. That's fascinating. By the way, if you wish to call in and chat auditing on the one hand, chat just finance, and in terms of regulation and responsibility and accountability, that's absolutely fine. I suppose it's so topical in the light of the whole discussion around regulation around FIFA, for example, right? But it's not just about that. Of course, as you know, we're putting the guest in the spotlight. So if you know her story, which is a fascinating one, you may want to call in. In fact, if you know her personally, who's listening? Family members?
Probably.
Okay, well, colleagues, family members, I mean, just take some time away from what you're doing and say hi to someone who's clearly achieved a lot. I think the point made here about you, Rene, is that you're the first black female chairman of this body. How much of an issue is that for you? Like the emphasis, like the plug is like female, first black female.
Well, I think it's probably from a transformation perspective, it's important that we have the first black female. But more importantly is that I don't be treated differently as a black female chairperson or chairman. We use the word chairman because man is not indicative of the gender. So for me, it's not as important as me being treated fairly, and like all other chairmen on the organization have been treated in the past.
So we can call you Mr. Chairman, which is interesting because, I mean, there's been this play out in terms of words, almost to be chairperson or chair lady and throw out that you...
At the IRBA, it's all about equality. Don't worry, we're okay with that.
And that's all that matters, yeah. How did you get... So in fact, to get to this position, you made the point that you're a chartered accountant.
Yes, sir.
Tell me about your journey. Where it all started.
It's been a long journey, and I think I took the scenic route as well.
You did.
I'm born and bred in Johannesburg. I was raised in Eldorado Park. Elders to most of your listeners.
Of course.
I schooled in Bosmont High School at Christian Botha, and I studied through UNISA. At that point in time, we had guidance as a subject at school, and my cousin was in a standard above me, and he wanted to become a chartered accountant. I didn't know what it was, but I also knew I wanted to do that because it didn't have science. You didn't have to do science, and I was hopeless in science, but I was very good in maths and accounting. So I then decided that perhaps that's a topic my guidance teacher needed to look into, and I asked around, and my dad knew someone who knew someone, and they brought in my grade 12 now, standard 10 then, we had someone that came to present to us what a chartered accountant is. And I said to him, I'm very keen, and how do I go about it? And he said to me, well, when do you finish your exams? And I told him, and he said, well, 2 days after that, after my matric exam, I could start working for them. I started.
They gave you a job?
They gave me a job. I started, it was a small firm called Gaddy Brothers and Partners. I started 2 days after matric. They showed me what a computer was. They showed me how to capture financial statements, right from box audit, as we know it in the audit profession. They gave me a box and said, start capturing these vouchers and give us a set of financial statements when you're done. And that's where my career started.
Okay, and I mean, the obvious thing there is you got a job coming out of matric, so you still actually didn't study accounting as a career. That was still going to happen, or was not going to happen if you found, goodness, this is clearly not for me.
Yes, no, I was very sure that was what I wanted to do.
Why were you so sure?
I think it came from my passion for accounting. My mother was a bookkeeper at the company she worked for many years. My dad had always been in insurance and later real estate, and I always knew that that's what I wanted to do. Everyone always seemed to be battling with getting their books right. In the area where I grew up, it was not something that people did, though. I mean, when people heard I wanted to become a chartered accountant, they would ask, what is that?
What is that? Yeah.
And I would explain, and someone would say, so do you write books? And I said, no, that's an author. And I'd
yeah. Well, maybe accountants can change the names, because they do write books, so they're authors anyway. Just quickly, for those that don't quite get it, what is an accountant, and what is a chartered accountant? What is a CA that we talk about so often, glowingly,
Well, I think with the normally, I think anyone can become an accountant, and I think we have, which we didn't in the past. We now have professional bodies where accountants can register and operate under those bodies, and they really just do the books. They write up your books on a monthly basis. They ensure that your mandatory payments are done to your SARS, etc., on a monthly basis. But a chartered accountant and a registered auditor at that is able to audit those books and make sure that the financial statements that you're presenting is fairly presented. And that can be used.
What's the difference? Is it a subtle difference, or in fact is it a very wide difference?
It's a wide difference. The one just makes sure that we have a set of financial statements. The other one makes sure that we actually have the supporting evidence to support these numbers that we have. And in the future, it's going to be even broader than that, because the auditor is going to have to state exactly what his findings were in the actual report, rather than just having it as a separate report like we do currently. So there is a difference, and I think if you ask those in the know, the financial difference is even better between accounting and a chartered accountant.
I'm well aware of it, having got 3 family members who are all CAs. I'm very well aware. Absolutely, yeah. In fact, somebody asking a question, which I just want to pick up via an SMS. What's the appeal of accounting? It sounds boring. Only 2 basic concepts, debit and credit, and simple arithmetic calculations. So at least you got your debit and credits right. How do you respond to that? It sounds very boring. There's nothing else to it.
Well, I guess it depends on the individual. Many accountants sit many a nights not able to sleep until they've been able to balance the financial statements, and that's what makes them tick, I guess. It depends on the personality. I've always been told that perhaps one of the reasons why I actually didn't remain in the audit profession was because I had a personality, rightfully or wrongfully, I don't know. But I think the...
Is that true generally as a stereotype?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just a stereotype. I think if doctors and lawyers went to party with auditors, they'd be quite surprised.
Let's get some calls. 0891 104 207. So just tuned in. Don't be late. We always have a great chat from the top of the hour. Rene Kenosi is with me. She's the chairman of the Independent Regulatory Board for Auditors, and I'll say this as well. She's also the first black female chairman, so first black and female of this organization with the acronym IRBA, and you call it IRBA, right? Yeah. Let's get some calls. Janus, go ahead. Hi.
Hi, Ashraf, and good afternoon to you.
Okay, just hold on 1 second. I need to get your headphones on. Sorry for you. Right. Go ahead, Janus. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Ashraf, congratulations to the chairman, to chair lady, for her nomination. That's at one point. On the other side, another problem we mentioned about that she's a lady and she's a black lady. She's the lady. She's a South African citizen. Doesn't have to be mentioned about color. So that's one point. Also, she's talking about independence and accountability of her organization. Who is actually controlling this? Who is nominating these people? Is it the minister or from the government? Is it really independent? We have got many independent sort of organizations. They call themselves independent, but they are not so because they are...
Let's find out. Okay, thanks for that, Janus. More calls. In fact, specifically if you know my guest, if you know Rene Kenosi, and you want to chat about our own career. In fact, you made the point. If you're from El Dorado Park, and I'm not saying only people from there must call, or from Bosmont, or what CJB, as you mentioned earlier on, absolutely do call into 0891 104 207, because that's a person who's certainly come through from those communities and clearly has excelled. Just that point about who appoints. So who judges the judges effectively in your field, you know?
Okay, so the process for being appointed to the IRBA board is that the IRBA will advertise the vacancies on the board. If you're qualified, you can then apply. And the final appointment is an open process. Anyone can apply. The final appointment is done by the minister. So it's a cabinet decision.
Oh, I see. Okay. So, and that's just the entire board?
Yes.
All right. Let's talk about the relevance then in terms of how this board functions in terms of keeping, effectively, I mean, you do that, you keep the auditors in check, right?
Correct.
Right. So how does it play out then in practical terms? Let me give you some examples of what you do.
So what we would have is, so we have 2 divisions, our investigations division and our inspections division, and their main function is really to ensure and keep our auditors intact. Ensure that they're doing the right things at the right time, and all the time, not sometimes. So our inspections division, based on a risk basis, they would audit the various audit firms. So they would review the files of clients that were audited by the various audit firms, and they would be issued with reports, and they would have to take or implement corrective measures. Our investigations department, so if you had a problem with your auditor and you thought that your auditor didn't do what they were supposed to do, you could report it to the IRBA, and the IRBA would do an investigation.
Okay, because I mean there's 2 parts. The one is someone reporting an auditor for incompetence.
Yes.
The flip side is the auditor colludes with the client for whatever reason to hide a whole lot of things. And then, of course, how would you know that unless somebody else reports it, isn't it? Because, I mean, you can't just arbitrarily go and audit every person, I would think that just logistically is impossible.
Correct. And I think you'd have to take into account, obviously, our resources, etc. But It's done on a risk basis, but remember, we set standards for the auditors and ethics, so we monitor that on an ongoing basis as well. So part of the inspections is to ensure that they're implementing the standards that we're setting.
Okay, and so that monitoring is very important, because
Very
that's the preventative in terms
Correct.
of the problems, right?
Correct.
Is there generally good buy-in in that industry? And I say that because wherever we are, and I'll touch on FIFA because I want to get your thoughts in a minute. But wherever we are, there's this issue around accountability, and not just soccer. We're talking as a country.
Generally,
there's this issue about people in positions of trust who effectively then mess it up.
Yeah. So to go back to the initial question about is there buy-in, I think the organization last year had gone to great lengths to ensure that, especially from the big players in the market, that in fact we were getting buy-in on our processes in terms of the findings that were being reported. It's all good and well to say that I know my house is in order, so I don't need anyone to come check. And when someone comes and you say, well, actually, you're wrong. But I think the reception has been quite good, and they've been quite responsive in that regard. And I think you're totally correct. We are seeing perhaps a lack in governance throughout South Africa and perhaps the rest of the world as well, is that there's a total lack of accountability in some areas, and as a board, I think that for us will be very important, to ensure that we hold people accountable. People are put
because
into
what's interesting, that lack of accountability
yes.
applies to people who are in positions of authority.
Correct.
You could apply the same principle to kids as well, and I understand that, but especially when they're in positions of high authority, we'd expect them to be so accountable, from MPs to cabinet ministers to auditors, etc. And there seems to be a problem there as well. What does it say about ethics and where we are in terms of our own morality as a country?
I think as a country, perhaps we are seeing a degradation of perhaps morals and ethics. But I think in our professions, we still have a responsibility to ensure that it's maintained.
Okay. By the way, carry on, sorry.
So I think it then becomes important that, if anything, as the standard and ethics setters of the profession, we have a responsibility to make sure that we live by it as well.
So would you say, therefore, now increasingly so the auditor is appointed, let's say, by the client, because that's how it will work, but still is now increasingly the arbiter, as opposed to someone who's on their side to, need I say, cook the books to satisfy the receiver?
So when I started, I spoke about independence and how important that independence is. And I think our ethics actually says something to the effect that we must be independent and be seen to be independent. And that's very important. The auditor has a responsibility to ensure that set of financial statements that they've signed off, they're willing to stand by the opinion that they've issued, even if it gets to a stage where perhaps there's it ends up in court, or there's a reportable irregularity that they've reported, etc. It's important that they remain independent throughout.
Often we talk about, and I'll just play on this issue of transformation at the moment, because we often talk about it in just about all industries, right?
Yes.
And my understanding that certainly in terms of the numbers of black South Africans in positions of auditors or CAs is fairly low as a percentage.
Yes.
And then when you throw into the idea of black Africans, it's even lower, right?
Yes.
What are your thoughts? Where, do you have numbers? I don't know if you do, but if you do, what are your thoughts about it, and how much of an issue, or is it an issue?
It is definitely an issue for us. The board at the end of the outgoing board at the end of last year, when it set its 5-year strategy, which has now been adopted, we looked at 4 pillars for our strategy going forward, and one of those pillars is indeed transformation. transformation within our organization, transformation at the board, transformation within the industry. And I think that's where we have probably failed in the past. I think there's about 36,000 chartered accountants in the country. Only 4,200, I think, are registered auditors, and of that, less than 10% are black registered auditors. So indeed, we are failing. So as a board, we've set strategies in place. Management is in the process of looking at projects that we can set up in the next 5 years to ensure that those numbers are indeed improved. And that looks at perhaps more outreach at schools, at universities, etc. We do have a problem in the industry in that, and the big four firms will tell you that as well, is that it's very difficult to retain black auditors.
Because the supply...
It's an issue of supply and demand, yes. Well, the supply, I think, is there. I mean, a lot of chartered accountants, 36,000 chartered accountants work for the audit firms, but they don't stay with them. It could be because it's more beneficial to go into private practice. Or join the private sector. So a lot of money is spent in grooming individuals, perhaps, to remain in those firms, to retain them, but it doesn't always happen. Yeah,
I'm sure it doesn't. 0891104207. Someone's saying, Ashraf, your guest is wrong to say that the words we dare to use, such as chairman or chairperson, have nothing to do with the terrible system of sexism and patriarchy. Language is not gender neutral, but form part of oppression or freedom in our society. From Tsepo in Joburg. We can audit that comment, just by the way, just so you know. Thanks for that, Tsepo. Can a person who did physics at high school study towards being a CA? I heard people who attempted fail in the second year, especially, and drop out. Well, my thought, in fact, to that is Rene in particular disliked physics and science. That's why she got into accounting. Just touch on it. But so if you did study that, and maybe not something else, can you still bridge that gap if you want to get into university? Can you in fact study accountancy after that if you didn't study it initially?
Indeed, you can. And I think there has been research that has actually indicated that if you did science at school, you actually did much better in accounting. I have a close friend of mine whose daughter, in fact, never did accounting ever.
In high school?
In high school, and she passed accounting cum laude in the first year.
How does one explain that?
I think it's just hard work and dedication. And I think there's a lot of help out there. There's a lot of assistance to students should they decide to pursue a career in accounting without having any accounting background. In the old days, they used to say credit is at the window and debit is at the door, and that's how they used to teach you debits and credits. A lot has changed since then.
Absolutely, I'm sure about that. Okay, well, let's continue talking then about your own self. So I want to go back to that time where you started and you got a job after 1-2 days, in fact, finishing matric. I mean, the lesson in that is you stuck your neck out, isn't it?
I did.
Because effectively, I mean, all of us in our ages, guidance was this complete free period. That's all it was. For homework or to sort of jumping out of the window because you got a free period. You imposed upon the guidance teacher.
Yes.
Effectively.
Yes, I did. Well, perhaps it's self-interest, who knows? Yeah.
But it changed your own destiny.
It did. It indeed changed my destiny. In fact, at the end of that session, 2 of us actually entered into the profession. My friend subsequently had decided that, after a couple of years of studying, that it wasn't for her, but I continued. So here I am.
Well, there you are. Good for you. What did you do next from that job that you got, because you were learning all about the tricks as this complete freshman, let's call it that, right? And then what?
Well, it was a small audit firm, and at that point in time, you were actually able to, you could do a 5-year article period or traineeship as it's called now. And a year and a half into that contract, the partnership actually dissolved. And what happened at that time, you either had to join another audit firm, and in my case, because I didn't have a qualification, I had to go into commerce for a couple of years. So that is where the experience comes from in banking and national sorghum breweries. And I completed my degree and then went back into articles. I was told that I could get a remission for part of the 1.5 years that I had previously done, but I'd opted to redo the full 3 years. So I redid my articles, and after articles I joined Wheels of Africa as an internal auditor. I then decided that auditing wasn't actually for me.
Okay, we'll find out why in just a second. If you tuned in, Rene Kenosi with me now. She's the chairman of the, in fact, newly appointed, if I understand, chairman of the Independent Regulatory Board for Auditors. So we'll continue putting her in the spotlight. Time now for the news headlines. It's 3:30.
Afternoon Talk on SAFM.
Chatting accountancy, chatting auditing, chatting business, chatting CAs and all that sort of thing to Rene Kenosi. In fact, you're the newly appointed person, right?
Indeed, I am.
So you have like how many days now? Is it days, weeks?
I think it's about 2 weeks.
Okay, absolutely. Do you have like this new vision that you want to have besides what is already agreed upon before?
I think because the vision was agreed upon last year, it would be for this board to see it through,
Okay.
And I think for the board, key right now would be independence and transformation.
Yeah.
I'm not saying the others are not important, but I think we've made inroads on the leadership, which is really assisting Africa in ensuring that they have good governance and they've set up their structures appropriately. The fourth element is comprehensive regulator. There is a need for the other accounting professions to be regulated as well, and that is something that we're discussing with the minister.
We'll see what happens there. What's your take on leadership? It's ironic. I mean, we were chatting earlier about other things. How important is the leader in a company? In this case, let's say classically a CEO of a company. How much importance do you place on that person in terms of the overall success or lack thereof of that company?
I think the leader, and more importantly the leadership style of that leader could be the success or the failure of that organization. And often you find that where you have autocratic leaders, people do things out of fear rather than because they enjoy it, and they have no passion for what they do. They just do it because at the end of the month they need to be paid. And I think it's important that leaders have, there's probably some qualities that leaders need, and more and more I think what we're seeing is that our leaders are not representing those elements. So we're talking about commitment, we're talking about being decisive in their roles. More and more leaders don't want to take decisions.
We all know that. What is your leadership style?
I think mine is very consultative, and I try to inspire. I also think it's very important that you work together. You may be delegating, but it's important that you still remain accountable at the end of the day.
That's very important. In fact, Leslie Adams saying, Ashraf, Rene sounds like the perfect teacher. Cool, calm, and in control of her class, no matter what the situation. Well, that's why she hassled the guidance teacher all those years ago. How true is that?
I facilitate on a municipal development program at Wits Business School, and I don't think the delegates will always say that. If Leslie had to ask my delegates, but I try to be calm. I think it's important that one stays calm and collected, and remains rational at all times, I guess.
What's your thoughts about leadership in our country? I mean, you're not there to audit South Africa Inc., right? But I'm going to ask you anyway because you are in that senior position. Yeah. What's your take on where we are as a country?
I think as a country, what perhaps needs to, and what the IRBA stands for, and me personally, is that we need to see better governance in our country. There has to be more accountability. There has to be more transparency in what we're doing. And I think those are important for us as a nation one is to grow. And I think it's for us to move past all the baggage that we've had, but you can't keep picking up the papers every day and I'm not sure how many people still read the papers, because some of us detox from the newspapers from time to time because it's just too much to take in. But certainly the role of governance and those charged with oversight of our organizations are perhaps failing us a lot of the time.
And how do we fix it? If they're failing us, what do we need to do? Because I mean, there's two parts: what you can do from an accounting side,
Correct.
but then there's also just what advice can you give all South Africans? And we talk corruption, we talk bribery, we talk all those sort of things that in fact are involved with just human beings all the time in the decisions we take.
Yeah. Look, I do believe that we need more skilled people. We need to upskill those that are in positions, and those who don't have the skills need to be trained. I do think if I, as an example, could take the municipal environment, if I may, is that we have people who are technically sound in the municipalities, but we need to upskill those that are charged with governance.
Yeah,
they need to understand exactly what their roles and responsibilities are there. They need to be able to take accountability. And it's difficult to take accountability when you actually don't know what you're supposed to be doing on a day-to-day basis.
You don't know, yeah, that's a good point. Rene Kenosi, lots more. We'll talk about FIFA, just her take on that right after this.
Afternoon Talk on SAFM.
So what's your take on FIFA then, in terms of what you understand by that?
I think it was Peter Drucker that said that management must do things right, but leaders should do the right things. And I think Sepp Blatter stepping down is the right thing. And I think if we look at what some of the root causes are that this is, has finally been investigated now, is really that when we look at governance and we look at the roles that individuals play, in auditing they teach us that there's certain indicators, that risk indicators that we need to look at. So someone being in a position for a long time is a risk indicator that we should be looking at some point in time.
And the power, we were discussing it earlier, the power of these individuals to decide on projects, and the biggest project is the awarding of a World Cup,
yes,
to a host nation, and it happens every 4 years, and 24 people decide, which actually means 13 people. Their views hold sway. I mean,
correct.
Lessons to learn from that. Too much power, to individuals who may be emotionally connected and less logical.
I think it's a combination. You see, if you have too much power, they'll end up dominating that arena that they're in. But more importantly, is the fact that the rotation of people charged with those functions shouldn't be there for long periods of time. Because eventually what happens is that I guess greed kicks in, and the original mission or vision of that organization takes a back seat. It's about our self-interest and no longer about what's in the best interest of the organization.
It's interesting when we talk, whether it's the president, whether it's the Auditor General or the Public Protector, in terms of your work, effectively all of you should be doing the same thing,
yes,
keeping the nation in check.
Correct.
Your advice to people, I mean, in terms of when they transact on a daily basis, what advice can you give all of us?
When you transact
generally? Just generally, yeah.
Look, I think we all have to manage our personal risks on a daily basis. Be careful about who you're transacting with to start off with. I teach risk management, and I often have this anecdote that, just like we sitting in a boardroom and discussing the strategy for the next 5 years, so our syndicates are doing the exact same thing on the outside there. So we must always be very vigilant of what we're doing on a daily basis.
Yeah, good point. If you could be in a position to advise the president on anything, what would you advise him?
I think my advice to the president would be that, we as a country, we have certain expectations, and we do believe that good leadership is what we need at this point in time.
A great lesson you've learned that you'd love to share?
I think the greatest lesson for me has always been, and it's probably what I live by, is that no matter what I do, I must be able to walk away from it with my integrity and my humility. And I think over the years, I've been, I guess, quite aware of the types of work I've done, the types of projects, the types of audit committees I accept, or even the boards, is about managing my own risk, so that I can wake up in the morning with that integrity and humility.
That's a very, very good point indeed. Right, a book you recommend we must read?
Difficult one. I don't get much time to read, but one of the books I've worked through quite recently was Desmond Tutu and Paul Tutu's book on forgiveness, and I think that's one lessons to learn from.
Yeah. And we've got about 30 seconds to go.
Yes.
Someone, active citizen, wherever in the world, who you admire right now?
Someone, I think it's a few people really, and I think it's more. One is, I think, Professor Janssen. I look forward to reading Professor Janssen's articles, and the reason is he's so passionate about education, and every single time you open the paper, and I think we see it on a daily basis.
Absolutely. Okay, so here's the one. The other two? There is, quickly.
I think my dad is one, and I may be biased, but he's my dad. But I think he's always been very supportive. I'm sure if I switch on my phone now, I have about 50 jokes from him.
Whoa,
that's
okay,
all he does on a daily basis.
Not pieces of advice. I got that. Yeah.
No.
All right.
And I guess generally, it's just the people who supported me and the people who mentored me
lovely.
Throughout my
Lastly,
journey.
A quote, if you can remember, to leave us with.
I think the quote I'd like to leave is the one by Nelson Mandela, and it says, "Our daily deeds as ordinary South Africans must produce an actual South African reality that will reinforce humanity's belief in justice, strengthen its confidence in the nobility of the human soul, and sustain all our hopes for a glorious life."
That sounds like a wonderful wish, and I hope it all comes true. Well, thanks for chatting to us. It's been very, very enlightening indeed, especially for those who didn't study science at matric, and they know they can still become accountants. Or rather, they did the science and not accounting, they can still become an auditor maybe. Rene Kenosi, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ashraf, and a happy birthday from the IRBA.
Thank you so much. Great, lovely indeed. Time now for Radio Vuka.